Good morning, Idaho. Welcome to the Local Yokel Idaho podcast, where we talk about what is going on in the wonderful state of Idaho. For those tuning in for the first time, we like to have a little bit of banter before we get into the stories, but I understand if you're short on time, so we have provided timestamps in the description so you can jump straight to the stories you are interested in. For those that are staying with us, welcome. Hope you all had a wonderful week. I think for everyone across the entire state, it has been quite nice with the weather we've been having. Also kind of weird to be sitting in March going for walks and realizing I don't need to take a coat. I'm kind of looking forward to getting back to the little bit of a cooler temperature, just a little longer, just a little bit more, please. But this week for me was very, very, very busy. As if you listened to last week's banter, you will remember that John had a busy week and it seems to have transferred to me, which I can't tell if that's a good or a bad thing, but either way, we're actually recording this a little bit earlier. That's why there's only going to be 2 stories. My week was a little bit more crunched, tighter on top of some events and things, but we have 2 here. One really nice, one with the University of Idaho and its acquisition of Arizona University, which has been brewing. I've been wanting to talk about it, but I really wanted to give it justice and research it properly. And then just briefly looking at the different candidates because filings closed, I think, a week or 2 last, something like that. And so looking over those and seeing how that has all shaped up. But speaking of which, John is here with me again, the editor of the podcast for those that are new, and he's co-hosting with me again.
Yeah, and I'm excited to go over some of this stuff, Tyler. It sounds very interesting. I think I said it a couple of weeks ago. I have learned more about Idaho politics by co-hosting and editing this show with you than I ever had before. So I'm super excited to get into this.
As I stated last time, I'm super glad to hear that, and hopefully the viewer as well has been able to pick up some stuff. It's definitely been a journey for me as well, and hopefully for those listening understand. I am not trying to act like I am a 100% expert. I am learning with you as well out there. Part of the reason to start the show is to go through it and learn about the state because I really enjoy it and try to offer that to you guys through that. But with that said, hopefully your week went well and you've been able to utilize the warm weather, John.
Yeah, we've taken a couple walks as a family. So last Saturday we were out in, what's the name of the town?
Is that over in eastern Idaho? Like
it was northwest of here. It was, anyway, regardless of where it was really awesome. It was Parma. It was out in Parma.
Oh, Parma. Okay, I went too far.
Yeah, but no, it was awesome. We went out there and the kids had a good time. My wife ran the 5K with them and I just had a good time playing around and throwing heavy things and learning how the Highland Games contenders, athletes,
contestants.
Contenders. No, but they're contestants. Learning how the contestants,
ding.
Right? Learning how the contestants do all of their things and what the athleticism involved looks like. And so it was kind of fun. And there were some friends of ours who were out there with us. So yeah, we had a great time. So if you, listener, ever get a chance, go to a Highland Games, I highly recommend it. And I highly recommend going to a small one because at the small ones you can kind of talk to anybody because it's really small. And also everybody there was really cool. All the contestants were cool. We were working with one of the guys who was running the thing. They had a free program for the kids and the kids were having a blast and the guy was really cool. And like, we had a great time. So Highland Games, I highly encourage it.
I'm going to have to ask, but I have no idea. I know that the Highland, like Scottish, right, or Irish type of background. Yep. And from that, the one thing I do know is you have like the log throwing, but what type of different events were there? What was kind of the schedule of the event?
Well, okay, so the history of the Highland Games, I'll talk about that real quick, just so that you understand what's going on. Back when the English ruled the whole of Great Britain, the Scots were annoying to England, to say the least. And so England decided that, well, since you're annoying, you don't get weapons. And the Scots were like, all right, we don't get weapons, but we still need to protect our king and we need to go to war and stuff like that because they really didn't like the English. And so they figured out that the best way to do these things was to be really strong. And then if the only weapon you have is a rock, you should be really good at throwing a rock. And so they had these contests of feats of strength to determine who are the strongest, who are the best. The ones who won got to be a part of the king's honor guard. And it was a part of the military structure of who gets to do what and all of that. And so there are events, a lot of them involve throwing heavy things. The log toss that you're thinking of is the really long wooden pole, and you have it upright, and then you try and throw it so that it flips itself over. And of course, the whole point of that is that if you are attacking someone who has walls, instead of like trying to build a ladder and climb the wall, you just kind of huck one of these pieces of wood at it, or you get 10 or 20 guys who do that, and you just climb up the log, and there you go. And it's easy to make. You go cut a tree down, strip all of its branches off, and throw it at the wall.
And then a little bit of fire added in there.
Right. It's the caber toss. That's what it's called, the caber.
Okay.
And then you have where you throw the iron up over a bar, like a high jump, but you're making the giant weight go up. There's a hammer throw. There's a rock throw. Yeah, it's
almost
awesome.
Sounds like the European primitive equivalent of an American.
Well, so it's a lot like
events or certain things.
Yeah, it's also a lot like the strongman competitions, if you've ever seen those, where the big giant, mostly Norwegian men, because they're maybe not Norwegian, but Northern European men, they all compete in finding who's the strongest person, and a lot of it involved picking up giant boulders and throwing things, and I think one event is just seeing how far you can drag a truck, and by truck I mean an 18-wheeler truck. But yeah, this is like the Scottish equivalent to that. So yeah, that's what it was. It was so much fun.
I didn't even know there was something like that in Idaho. I knew there was like the Renaissance, different things that'll happen in the valley, and I know they have some stuff like that. We've talked about like jousting that'll happen over in eastern Idaho.
Talking about that,
but I didn't know that there was this type of thing. Yeah, and the chariot racing. That goes back almost Rome.
Well, apparently the Highland Games is a big deal. We were talking to the guy that was running the show, and he runs these things almost every weekend, all spring, all summer, all fall. And there's a big one up in Alaska that they're taking over at this point. Yeah, and he runs all of them in the Northwest United States. So yeah, it's a big deal. It's a national, I think it's also an international thing. And it reminded me a lot of chess at the professional level, as odd as that sounds. Or even tennis, kind of like tennis, where you have lots of smaller tournaments and then you've got a couple really big ones. And it's the really big ones that matter. But to get to the really big ones, you have to play all the little ones, and you have to get your rating, and you have to beat certain people. And so
almost sounds like bowling to a sense.
Yeah, bowling. Bowling would be another good
all
analogous
these different leagues
sport.
and clubs.
Or I guess long distance running is kind of the same. To qualify for the most prestigious races, you have to have done other things and gotten so much time. I know my father-in-law was looking to run the Boston Marathon at one point. And to run the Boston Marathon, at the very least, you have to have ran another marathon, I think within the last calendar year. And I could be wrong on that, but
right.
But yeah, you have to have run another marathon, and you have to have gotten a certain time based on your age and gender and all of that. And so
interesting.
Yeah, so the Highland Games is very similar, I guess.
Huh.
Who knew?
Alrighty. I hope it's growing for him. I would assume, besides like the Latino population, is you either have like Scottish or German, like that Irish/Scottish, and then German that's in the valley. So I could totally see it taking off there, and encouraging to hear it's growing for him, at least in the Pacific Northwest. I don't know about Idaho. But with that said, we will move into our first story here, which is related to something that definitely has not been consistent. U of I acquisition of Phoenix University. So if you're a regular listener of the show, you've heard us talk about different bills related to the library harm material bill, or the needle exchange bill, or some other form of a bill, because there's been a lot of big ones that have moved through the legislature this year. But something that has been brewing in the background with the Idaho legislature and the University of Idaho. As many of you may remember from listening to the midweek report, the University of Idaho has been working towards acquiring the University of Phoenix, which was going smoothly with a unanimous vote from the Idaho State Board of Education, but has recently run into issues. From Attorney General's Raul Labrador's lawsuit to the Idaho House passing a resolution to say that the vote was void. In this segment, we'll give you guys an overview of the two universities, the timeline of the events, and then discuss whether what the House is doing is right. But starting off with that first, John, you want to tell us, give people context about the University of Idaho and Phoenix?
Yeah, so for those new to the state, or someone like me who doesn't keep up with university news, the University of Idaho was established in 1889. It's Idaho's oldest public university, and it serves as the state's land-grant and primary research institution. It's a public university because the state government funds it, and it's a land-grant university because it was established with the aid of land grants from the U.S. government. On the other hand, the University of Phoenix is a private, for-profit university that specializes in online education. It was founded in 1976 with the goal of providing higher education opportunities to working adults who might not be able to attend traditional college classes due to their job schedules or other commitments. In recent years, the university has faced criticism and legal challenges over its business practices, including a $191 million settlement with the Federal Trade Commission over deceptive advertisements. So the deal that we're looking at here, and if this whole deal went through, it would involve creating a not-for-profit entity to purchase the for-profit University of Phoenix for $550 million, with the seller providing an additional $200 million in cash that would transfer to the not-for-profit entity upon completion of the transaction. The acquisition would be financed through both non-taxable and taxable bonds separate from the University of Idaho's budgets, ensuring that Idaho taxpayers are not directly responsible for the acquisition costs. However, the University of Idaho has agreed to cover up to $10 million annually should the not-for-profit entity managing the University of Phoenix miss payments on the debt related to the transaction, with the University of Phoenix's current annual cash flow of about $100 million expected to cover these costs. So, Tyler, you want to go through the timeline of what this is going to look like?
So yeah, giving you guys kind of an overview of the timeline of events so you know where this is all lining up. In February of 2023, the University of Idaho's president, Scott Green, launched talks with Titan Partners, while the University of Arkansas was still considering acquiring the University of Phoenix. So those were all happening at the same point there. People were interested. People were mulling around there. Then on May 18th of 2023, the Idaho State Board of Education, acting as the Board of Regents for the University of Idaho, unanimously approved the creation for a not-for-profit entity to acquire the operations of the University of Phoenix. The separate nonprofit entity, New U Incorporated, was formed to facilitate the merger with the University of Phoenix. This was because of legal and financial separation, governance structure, accreditation requirements, and most importantly, compliance with U of I's nonprofit status, because University of Phoenix, as we've talked about, is a for-profit university. And then also with that, the approval occurred after 90 minutes of discussion without public comment, and the proposal to be voted on was disclosed only one day earlier on May 17th. Granted, according to Idaho Ed News, within 24 hours before the May 18th State Board vote, board members received more than 24 emails urging them to vote no or go slow, so kind of something to be aware of there. Then on November 14th, the Higher Learning Commission, which accredits the University of Phoenix, formally approved the acquisition by the nonprofit affiliated with the University of Idaho. Then in June of 2023, the Idaho Supreme Court announced it would hear oral arguments regarding Attorney General Raul Labrador's open meeting lawsuit against the State Board of Education. The lawsuit claimed that the board conducted discussions about the University of Idaho's acquisition and the University of Phoenix in a series of closed meetings, which Labrador argued was against the law that requires such deliberations to be held in public to ensure transparency. Then on January 31st of 2024, so we're getting a little closer here, Raul Labrador's lawsuit against the University of Idaho Phoenix deal was dismissed. The ruling effectively dismissed the allegations of open meeting law violations, allowing the University of Idaho to proceed closer to its bid to acquiring the University of Phoenix. The court's findings indicated that the action taken by the Idaho State Board of Education did not violate the state's open meeting laws as alleged in the lawsuit. And then we get to our last one here, which is on March 6th of 2024. So just recently, Idaho lawmakers introduced House Concurrent Resolution 26, opposing the University of Idaho's plans to purchase the University of Phoenix, raising significant questions about its legal authority, public policy, and procedural legitimacy, and threatening potential legal action. It passed the House with a vote of 49 in favor, 21 against, and 0 absent, and is moving towards the Senate currently, which All that said, giving you guys an overview so you know what's been happening up to this point, one question I had that came up as I was researching this is how would this not cost Idaho taxpayers money? Because, the University of Idaho is mainly funded from taxpayer funds. So as I mentioned earlier, the financing for both the non-taxable and tax bonds, it's separate from the University of Idaho's budget, which brings up that whole question. The answer there, again, is a little tricky, but I'm going to try to piece it apart for me. This is the best I could kind of boil it down to, is that these bonds would essentially be loans that the University of Idaho, through the newly created nonprofit entity, would take out from investors. Some are taxable, some are not taxable. You can go into that if you want to research it, but basically, one's taxed, one's not. And then the payment on the loans would be covered by the University of Phoenix current annual cash flow, which is about $100 million per year, thus making it so U of I doesn't have to spend any money on the loans. So the profit that's being generated from Phoenix takes care of the loans that would be necessary to buy them. Granted, the University of Phoenix would be adding $200 million in cash to the $550 million overall purchase, and U of I has agreed to cover up to $10 million annually should that nonprofit entity managing the University of Phoenix miss any payments or debts related to the transaction. So basically, summing that all up, a University of Phoenix is putting a certain amount of money into it to make the deal happen. The money that U of I would be putting into it, so it's not hurting tax dollar coffers, would be brought through loans. Some would be taxable, some would be not. The non-taxable ones, you're going to have less interest, blah, 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 blah. But the risk is that if the University of Phoenix decreases in the amount of revenue that they continue to produce and they have other issues, and basically if it's not a worthwhile investment, then U of I will be on the hook to put $10 million annually in to try to help out with that debt and different issues. So, John, would you like to kind of break apart what the benefits of the merger or not would be?
Right. For the University of Idaho, that means it could expand its footprint for online education. This would allow them to reach people who normally wouldn't have gone to college. And like with any of these, there's also hope that this would generate more money for U of I. So they can put it towards other programs. And lastly, that would give U of I more products to offer to potential students, therefore increasing the potential clientele that they would have, or their student body. For the University of Phoenix, on the other hand, would be the transition to a nonprofit status. The acquisition would transition the University of Phoenix from a for-profit to a not-for-profit institution, which could help improve its public image and potentially alleviate some of the regulatory pressures faced by for-profit colleges. Those are some pros, but now the cons here. For the University of Idaho and Idaho taxpayers specifically, there are financial risks and liabilities here. Critics have raised concerns about the financial risks associated with taking on the University of Phoenix, given its history of legal challenges and the potential for future liabilities. There's also the worry that unforeseen costs could ultimately fall on Idaho taxpayers. The second thing here would be the reputational concerns. The University of Phoenix's past controversies and legal settlements could pose reputational risks for U of I. Critics argue that affiliating with an institution previously criticized for deceptive practices could harm U of I's standing. And finally, the impact on bond ratings and financial stability. Moody's Investors Service warned that the purchase of the University of Phoenix could trigger a multi-notch downgrade of U of I's bond rating, potentially making future financing more expensive and impacting the university's financial stability.
And digging into that, so we've given you that dump, which this was way more time than I want to admit to research this, because welcome to money and legalese and people not having documents. Anywho, but the 3 points for me that I took out of this and I wanted to make clear for the viewer is that I couldn't find anything particularly in this devious, we'll put it that way. But there are certain parts of this that through this process have been a little concerning of the hidden parts. One of that, as we read at the beginning, the time frame of the vote. It's announced one day, and then you have 24 hours to either know about it, to put comment on it, and or then go and try to be involved and try to give public statements. That's one part of it that just seems a little like, if you've got nothing to hide, you would probably want to tout this and be like, look, community members are supporting what we're doing, and this is a great idea, and blah, blah, blah. And look at all these people that came to the meeting and liked our thing, right? It's definitely a shady thing. and there might be something that I just wasn't able to find, but it is suspicious.
Yeah, the speed of this is a little questionable, and I can see that.
I'm wondering if it has to do because of reputation, because they're like, hey, this is a great buy, but it doesn't look great in the public eye, so let's see if we can scoot this quick.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know. This one's kind of weird because there have been issues, like we talked about, there have been several issues with University of Phoenix. And it makes me ask the question, and we kind of talked about it a little bit with the pros and cons. It makes me ask the question, why does University of Phoenix want to sell itself? And part of that is going from a for-profit to not-for-profit organization. Part of that could just be that they think they can make a lot of money through this sale, but also it could be that they want to divest out of something that they see as not being able to continue working. So
right.
On the surface, it looks good, but like with any other acquisition, my curiosity is twofold. One, why do they want to sell? And two, why do we want to buy?
Right.
And for the University of Idaho to want to buy it does make sense. They can reach new students. They have more ability to make money. They can increase
they can already hook into a university that is extremely experienced with online, which if you're a legacy institution, that is a scary thing to jump into.
I believe it. I mean, even for companies, that's a scary thing to jump into. I've been a part of several companies who wouldn't do remote work for a long time. And then they were forced to, and it really hurt. So, that could also be University of Idaho's desire. Maybe they see their student body decreasing because people don't want to come on campus, or they see the potential for another COVID-19 pandemic thing or whatever. And so they want to have those resources to do education from home. So there's lots of reasons for it. And I understand that. It just seems
there's something
odd,
there,
right? Like it.
Well, I think that's, that really hooks in well to the second point, which is the House concurrent resolution, which in it, when you read it, the House isn't saying that there's anything generally bad. I give generally. They do say there's something bad. That's why they have the resolution, which is basically stating that, hey, we think that the Idaho State Board stepped outside of its regulatory bounds to make a decision this broad. This should have been something that was determined by the legislature, which I'm realizing because there were so many bits with this. I tried to make sure to get it all in there. But the state board's decision, the state education board's decision to vote on this was done after the legislative session. So the legislature couldn't address or be involved in it at all, which part of the concurrent House Resolution 26 is saying, no, you should have either at least done it during the legislative session so that we could have been involved in it, or we should have been part of that voting or decision-making process, because that's a big financial effect on one of the state's largest institutions. And as the governing body of the House and Senate, we should have a say in that. And so that's what the House resolution is. But like you said, from what I was getting from lawmakers and this resolution, a sense of, well, this isn't particularly bad, but there's certain parts of this that are really sketchy. We want to pump and slow the brakes and bring more accountability to this. Same with the lawsuit that Raul Labrador gave, trying to be like, no, wait, hold, stop. This doesn't look right. Something's not right here.
Right. Something's fishy.
We don't have all the data right now yet, and we can't see an obvious. There again, like I was doing my research, I wasn't able to see an obvious reason that it was fishy, besides the way it's been handled.
Yeah, I don't know. This one's goofy, and I don't know how to feel about it.
Usually me and John, either John's like, no, this is bad, and maybe we'll have a back and forth discussion, or we're both the same lane. But even with there again, to the viewer, I mean, we would love to hear what you have to say. Send us a message on Twitter. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because this it is. It's just but yeah, with the resolution, it just is boiling it down to that crux of, did the State Board of Education have the authority to make something this wide sweeping that quickly without enough other oversight or input, and that were certain procedural norms bypassed? When I tried to go research if that was the case, right, the argument for that, but the charter for the State Board of Education or for U of I. It doesn't actually explicitly say in the event of a merger or a buying of another institution that they have or don't have to. And that's where kind of this ambiguity is getting in, where the legislators know you have to, but then the state board and others, well, there's nothing that says we had to, so it'll be interesting. Right. I think this is going to be an example like we talked about last week with Scott Henderson and that whole fiasco with firearms in public places. Thankfully, we got to see that on the rear end of it, of where the courts had already gone it. There was a decision on that point. Before that point, you really couldn't have made a statement of, is this something that where legislation needs to be changed? Who's at fault here? That's where it needed to move through the courts. We'll have to see, one, can the resolution get passed, which I think the takeaway from the story is yes, it should be passed, just to at least slow the brakes.
Yeah.
That should be something as Idahoans we should encourage and want to have happen. And then the courts to then go through that process of, was this out of line, was it not? Hopefully it says that there were certain procedures that need to be done, and then in the doing of those procedures, more things will then come to light that then would better be able to help this either be more comfortable for the legislature and the government. But yeah, and then, I mean, boiling that then all down to what it means for people here in Idaho, if the deal goes forward, then U of I could have, I think, a really great online platform in a sense for that. Obviously, sometimes the best way to buy something is to buy a fixer-upper if you know how to fix it up.
Right.
And it doesn't have structural wrongs. Like you go to buy a fixer-upper, you have it inspected to make sure the bones are good. Then you can fix it up. But it's not worth trying to fix up an institution in this example if the core pillars and components are the rotten bits, not circumstantial or small bits where, we hired a bunch of really bad people for the marketing department and they said, hey, we have this accreditation and that accreditation when we didn't. If that's the case, then cool. You cleaned house and you got slapped and you changed your ways. And then this becomes a really great deal for U of I because the reputation's a little bit down, but U of I can then buy it, turn around and have this really great online university that could generate revenue for the taxpayer, in theory, air quotations. But there again, those strings we talked about, which is a little bit concerning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any case, I would say after going through all this and if to give a conclusion and an application to the viewer, one, I would say that you should encourage your senators now that it's moving over towards the Senate because they've only got a week or two left. So you might need to really lay on the horn there to make sure it gets in line. We'll have to see where it progresses from here, but definitely some great possibilities and some other concerning procedures that have gone on with this one. And hey there, since you've made it this far, you've probably enjoyed the show thus far. That probably means you want to keep up with all things Idaho. So don't forget to hit the subscribe button or follow button on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter. That way you don't miss any of our future content about Idaho. Not to mention, if you found our content valuable and think it might benefit others, please like and share it. We have short clips from the show on our YouTube, Rumble, and Twitter accounts, which are perfect for sharing parts of the show that you found important or valuable with friends and family. Whether it's a fascinating political update or an intriguing local story, your shares and likes can help us spread the word about our beautiful state. Also, for our audio-only listeners on platforms like iTunes or Spotify, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please rate the show and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us a ton to improve the channel as a whole. Thank you for your support and for being part of the local Yokel Idaho community. Together, hopefully, we can keep Idaho informed, engaged, and involved in this wonderful state. Now, let's dive into the next story. Then coming to our second story here, Idaho candidate races. For those not aware, because I even kind of missed this a little bit. Last week, the window to apply to run for public office in the state closed. Depending on when you're listening to this, that date may change, but it closed in the past, which if you wanted to run, sorry, that window has closed there. But for those who have, we now have the wonderful ability to see who will be running in so said races because that window has closed. Now, all that said, with this segment, I want to try to go through and look at those and kind of give you an idea and breakdown of those. If you want to go look for your specific area, please go and do that. Unfortunately, we just don't have time to cover all of them, especially when I think there's like 70 representatives in the state and then like 35 senators. So that's kind of a lot to go through, but we're going to just try to hit the high points there as we run through this and also talk about the United States representatives, which there's not as many running those because there's only 2 positions open and then the people running for them. But with that said, John, you want to kind of break down for us how generally that works for people?
Yeah, so there are a lot of finer details to this, but for the sake of getting to the candidates, we're just going to do a quick overview. So for the U.S. representative that we have, the state is divided into 2 legislative districts. The first one hugs the western side and completely covers the northern tip, and the second one covers all of eastern Idaho and most of Boise. Votes are held in each of these districts for the candidates that will represent them. So then for the state representatives that represent you in the Idaho House, they're decided based on your district, which there are 35 in the state, and each gets 2 representatives totaling 70 for the whole state. And then the Senate, very similar to the state representatives, your senators are connected to those 35 districts, but the difference is that your district only gets 1, not 2, like with your representatives.
And then kind of then going into the candidates like we wanted to, starting off with the big one here, the one that we'll probably have the most discussion on, is the United States representatives. For representative number 1, that'll be Canyon County, Owyhee County. I can't remember all the counties that are going to be in there. It kind of splits here and there, but you travel, as I said, up kind of the western half, as John alluded to there, and covers most of the north. The current one for that is Russ Fulcher. He will be running again on a Republican ticket. And then for the Democrats, they have Kaylee Peterson running on that. And then for the Libertarians, there's Matt Losby. And then the fourth one, so there's 4 there. And then for the Constitutionalists, you have Brendan J. Gomez. So that would be for Representative 1. Then for Representative 2, a gentleman that we have talked about at length. Currently, you have Mike Simpson as the Republican for that position. And then following up behind him, also, we have a couple running on the Republican ticket. Scott Cleveland, and then Sean Higgins, all running Republican. And then David Roth, who's running as a Democrat. And then we have Todd Corsetti running for the Libertarians. And then 2 for the Constitutionalists you have Curtis Serra, and then Marvin Richardson also running on that constitutional ticket, which I would, not getting too deep into the weeds there, I would say that you can see there's a little bit of dislike for the current person in that position for Representative 2. Just by the amount of submissions that are kind of running in that lane, even in the Republican, that you see up with Russ Fulcher, Russ Fulcher's the only Republican running for that, which, I would say is a sign that everyone's pretty happy with that position. But then for Representative 2, you've got 2 Republicans running against the current incumbent, Mike Simpson. We'll probably break down some stuff later on that, and I'm working on some interviews with some people running against him, because I know it's something we've talked about before on the show. But then kind of moving on to Idaho Senator map, let me pull open mine here so I have it. We could start here in the Treasure Valley. So I know I won't get into the controversy on air with this, but for Legislative District 13, I know that one has been a hopping. So for senators, they are 3. So Democrat Sarah Butler, and then a gentleman we mentioned here before, or if I haven't, I should have, because he's doing some pretty awesome work there in the legislature, Brian Lenny. Mm-hmm. And then he has someone following it up to try to take his position, Jeff C. Agenbrod. Forgive me, sir, if I have gotten your last name wrong. And then kind of going over, so we'll make sure to hit the Treasure Valley here. You have Legislative District 12, Ben Adams, who's the current incumbent. I know that. He's running again against Victor Rodriguez. The Treasure Valley is the one that's the most tightly packed. If you look right across the state, just population.
There's a lot of districts in here.
Yeah, I don't know the exact ruling on that, but I know that has to do with population, and then that decides the districting and how that all works out. And that, I think, comes from, I can't remember. I think that's from the Attorney General.
Well, because your representatives and, your senators and representatives are only supposed to represent a certain number of people.
Right.
And so as populations change and people move, you have to redraw district lines to make sure that your representatives aren't representing a disproportionate number, either too many or too little. And that's where a lot of interesting conversations come up on gerrymandering, districting and where you draw those lines and how you draw them, and things can get really weird. I look at ours in Boise, and they look pretty solid. They're kind of just blocks of, well, here's this area, and then here's this area and this area. We don't have any of those weird. Gosh, you look at the Chicago districts or New York districts, and gosh, they're all over the place, and they're crazy, and there's little fingers going everywhere, and it's insane.
You're like, why is there a giant finger? How is that still connected to your population when
Right.
it's several miles away?
Or you have like 2 balls connected by a string. And you're like, what? How is that a district? And it's just so that you can pack the people that you want in the district that you know will
Right.
vote the way you want them to vote, and then you call that a district and you call it done, so that
Right.
you can keep the people in power that you want to have in power. Yeah.
Which,
But-
I mean, we won't go too deep on the House part, but John, I do have a list there of a bunch of unopposed candidates that are going to be running. So we actually have a little bit of a list of that if you wanted to read that real quick.
Yeah, so we can go through those. So unopposed candidates, there's a small group of 3 senators and 6 House members, and we might have covered those already, but 3 Republicans and 6 Democrats are unopposed in both the primary and the general, which kind of blows my mind that you would run unopposed even in your primary, but I guess everybody loves you, so no one's going to run against you. Anyway, so this includes Senators Kelly Anthon, James Ritchie, and then Melissa Wintrow, and then Representatives John Gannon, Brooke Green, Ted Hill, James Holtzclaw. Dude, that's a cool name. Holtzclaw?
Yes, that's super cool.
Like, that's one that I would rather go by my last name instead of my first. Hey, Holtzclaw, come over here. Yeah, man. Sorry. Then Representatives Chris Mathias. I've read that name and it throws me off. Representatives Chris Mathias and Elena Rubel.
Right.
Elena threw me, but that's a cool name too. I like that, Elena.
You know, it is interesting when you're looking at legislator, you'll run into interesting names, and I love interesting names. They can be a little bit challenging to record on the show, and you at some point the viewer will see bloopers of it where I have a knack to come up with words that weren't there to begin with, but my brain just looked at the words like, I think it's that, and it's not.
It reminds me a lot of my wife. So we read some fantasy books together. Like, you know, Lord of the Rings type books, and the names that she comes up with for characters, it blows my mind, because I look at the name and I try and figure out how it would be pronounced. She just looks at the name, comes up with something as a placeholder in her brain, and moves on.
I'll do that too, because I want to read. I don't want to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out the name.
Yeah. The one that I love is The Wheel of Time, and. Actually, I don't know if there's a pronunciation guide in that one. And I remember I didn't know there was until I got to the end of the first book. And then I went, uh-oh, now I have to go relearn how everyone's names are pronounced because I apparently pronounced them completely wrong. And then the funniest part. So that series is, I think it's like 13 books, and it spanned, I don't know, 15, 20 years. Wheel of Time fans are going to murder me on this one, but sorry. But yeah, then I went back and listened, and the narrators throughout the series, they changed the way they narrate and pronounce names. There's 2 of them. There's a guy and a gal who are reading, and they're not consistent with each other, and they're not consistent with themselves from book to book, and it's wonderful. I love it. But anyway, yeah.
Like, welcome to humanity.
Yep. Names are awesome.
Right. Which, kind of touching on something we already kind of discovered while looking through there has been an increased amount of Democrats participating. So out of the 105 legislative races, there are 81, which is a significant increase from the 45 races that they contested in 2022. So that's almost like 2 times the amount that they're contesting in races this year. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. As on like the Republican side of things, the Republicans have fielded candidates for 99 of the 105 seats in the legislature. We weren't able to find candidates for 5 races in the blue-leaning districts in Boise and then swing districts in Bannock County. And then for those, as things progress, to give, I guess, you guys a heads up as things go on, we're going to make sure to cover this. So please like and subscribe. That would be nice so we can keep you up to date on it. The primary election for all these is set for May 21st, 2024. And then the winners of the primary, so kind of that whittling down, if you have a bunch of Republicans, who's going to be the Republican in that race, then advances to the main election that will be on November 5th for 2024. So mark your calendars for that. We'll try to keep that up to date. And for anybody that's listening out there that is running in these races, please reach out. We'd love to have you on for an interview so people can hear you running for that, especially if it's a position that's a little bit more contested. We would love to have that and have that discussion, ask you questions specifically on what you're running on and what positions and why you think you'd be best for that role. thank you for listening to the entire podcast. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to me via email at localyocalidaho2022@gmail.com or on Twitter by tweeting me at localyocalidaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now. I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.